Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 311 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. I'm Jackson Mummy. I'll be joined by Megan Saya in just a few minutes to talk about what's been happening in the world of the bar exam this past week. And I guess we would say that it feels like the dam is about to break. It was a relatively quiet week, but there is an awful lot that's going to happen in a very short period of time. We're going to break all that down for you in just a couple of minutes. If this is your first time on the podcast with us, we're really glad to have you here. Welcome. We do these podcasts in video and audio format. If you'd like to watch today's episode, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/311. That's the episode number. And if you'd like to listen to the podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, just about any place that podcasts are syndicated. Make sure that you do subscribe, however, so that you don't miss any episodes. And of course, there's a lot of breaking news here. So if something breaks in the next few days, we're going to make sure they'll let you know via the podcast method. I also want to let you know before we jump into today's episode that we're being brought to you by a special free training webinar. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowds and the Fear. Now, in this 1-hour training, we break down the strategy for taking the bar exam in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. We talk about the advantages of taking the exam and what you need to do as the bar exam landscape is changing so very rapidly. We started offering this free training when COVID-19 really broke out across the country several months ago. And in that time, we've had thousands of people go through the training, and it's been really very powerful and very well received. Now, at the end of the training, I will do a live Q&A session for the people that are on the training to answer any questions that you've got about your particular jurisdiction or a particular strategy that we've discussed. And I encourage you to stick around for that. It's been really valuable for people to be able to participate in that Q&A. This training webinar is completely free. We're offering it on Saturdays and Tuesdays. You do need to register, and you can do that really easily. Right here on the podcast, just go down to the button that lets you register. You'll see it on the video and the audio, or you can go to our website, celebrationbarreview.com/now for more details and to register. And then we'll see you on Saturday or Tuesday for this free training webinar. Now is the best time to take the bar exam, and make sure you stick around for the Q&A. All right, well, I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. Megan and I met with our students on Friday to talk about what was going on in the world of the bar exam, and I want to share some of that discussion with you now. Well, Megan, I think it's time to jump into our weekly revolving world of craziness and see what's new in the world of bar exam and COVID-19. So why don't you kick us off?
So amazingly, this week was probably the quietest week we have seen in this field since all the changes started happening way back. I can't even remember, in March, maybe. Yeah, this was the quietest one. So there were no changes for a really long time. And then last night, one change came down. So New Mexico, which is a UBE jurisdiction, had not previously given a date for their fall exam. They had said they would not do July, but didn't know when they were doing it for sure. They ended up picking September 9th and 10th. So if you're taking the UBE in New Mexico, you have a date now. So that's really helpful, September 9th and 10th. And I don't know where they are on their registration, if they're open or not yet, but check it out if you are looking for a September date somewhere in the UBE that you can sit for. At this point, that's a new option. So, yes.
Okay. And you want to recap where we stand on some of these other big changes?
So we're still waiting to hear from California on what they're going to do. The baby bar, the California baby bar, which we'll talk about in a little bit, was this last Tuesday. And so we'll talk about what that means. It was the first online bar examination that, in my mind, has ever been given of any kind. So it was a really big deal, and California has not decided yet or said yet what they're going to be doing for certain, but we knew they were waiting for the baby bar. New York is now, no current registrations are open in New York at the moment. The last we had heard, they did open up a tier 4 that allowed some people who were out of state to, and not first time takers, to take it. still really limited and still not guaranteeing that any of those would make it in. But
yeah, and to be clear, that group was only people who had failed once. So if you had multiple failures, you still weren't in. So that would have been
a lot of limitations on who fell into that group. But even that group is now closed. So we're waiting to see if they're going to open up a tier 5, if they're closed for sure now.
And I think we should point out that New York is still planning to do an in-person test in September. And the governor, Cuomo, has instituted a 14-day self-quarantine if you're coming into New York from some of the COVID hotspots. So if you were going the reverse direction, Florida to New York to take the exam, you would have to self-quarantine that way. And if you're coming from New York to take the Florida exam, there's still a 14-day quarantine. I-95 must be interesting at the northernmost Florida border in both directions, right?
Yeah, so I think another thing to keep in mind now that New York, and it's not just New York, all those sort of New England states, or most have instituted this quarantine, 14-day quarantine if you're coming from, and it will change because it's if you're coming from a state that is seeing an uptick in cases. So we don't know who those states are going to be in September or in July. But whatever those states are that are seeing an uptick, then you need to be prepared that you may need to quarantine for 14 days. But another thing to note is if you are, for instance, if you live in New York, or I believe like Connecticut is one of the states, Massachusetts, that's doing this. If you come down to Florida to take the bar exam, you will have to quarantine for 14 days in Florida before the bar exam. Okay. Then when you go back to New York, you would have to quarantine again for 14 days. They don't, like New York has said, they don't care where you live. They care about where you're coming from. So if you're coming from Florida, and let's say Florida still has a rise, which next month is, we're looking at for that in July. So you are looking at 30 days. You're looking at 14-day quarantine on the front, 2 days of taking the test, and then a 14-day quarantine when you get back home. So you need to know that and be prepared for what that means. Can you do that for 30 days? You are going to basically be in quarantine except for those.
Yeah. I think in terms of talking about Florida, I'll just say, since I'm in Orlando, which is one of the 2 places where the test is being given, we are seeing a massive uptick here locally in this part in Central Florida. The Florida bar continues to say they're going to give the exam. I continue to believe that that is folly, but they do not operate in anything that resembles traditional decision making here. And there's no nice way to say it. They just do what they want to do. And if they're determined to give this exam, I think they will give it. And I don't think the legislature or the governor will stop them, or the courts, frankly. And so even though the Florida Bar's meeting was held virtually, their annual meeting, even though we are closing things as rapidly as they open and reopen, the Florida Bar has given not one inkling that they're going to change what they're doing. So I know we're going to get into some questions later about people asking, what should I do about the bar exam? If I'm registered to take it. Florida remains a real open question in my mind as to what you should do, because I think they are going to give the exam come hell or high water. And I just think people will have to make a decision. And your point, particularly for New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, folks coming down here, is you may be hit with those quarantines on both ends of the trip. So that's a pretty significant, consideration to make. So there's that part that's been going on. What's been happening with the October 5th and 6th test date?
So we've stayed steady now with just Maryland and DC are giving the online October 5th and 6th exam as of right now. They're still trying to work out reciprocity with one another. So we're going to see what happens with that. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some more states do it, but we're not sure. The biggest state that potentially will be switching to the October 5th and 6th date is California. California has said, as of right now, their September date, September 9th and 10th, but California has said they will possibly switch over to October 5th and 6th. What that would allow them to do is to give the shortened online MBE version that's in that October 5th and 6th exam. If California sticks with the September 9th and 10th, they have to either write their own multiple choice questions or not have a multiple choice portion to the exam. So,
or if they somehow manage to figure out a way to give the exam in person, then they could administer the MBE. Right. But that seems very unlikely, doesn't it?
there's no talk. The way that the courts and the state bar are talking in California seem to completely discount the possibility of an in-person exam. There are just so many people. California already has multiple sites, so it's not like Florida where everyone went to Tampa and so then they thought, oh, we'll just open one more site. In California, I mean, there are several. I think there's 3 sites just in Southern California alone. We are a gigantic state with 7,000 plus people taking the bar every time. This is not a case of, well, we could just spread them out into groupings of, 100 or 500 even. It's too many places that we have to.
So you're right. So it seems likely that California has to go to what they're calling remote testing, which is really just another word for online testing. And so, as you said, this week, the California first year baby bar exam was given online, the first time a bar exam has been given online. You had a chance to talk to some folks that went through that experience, and I was hoping you could sort of share some of that debrief with our audience about what the online testing was. Now, we're not talking about the substance of the test at all. We didn't go into any of that with the students. We weren't debriefing them on substance, just on the logistics of the process. So why don't you explain a little bit about what you learned about that online test?
Yeah, so I think the reason why this is important for people, even if they're thinking, but I'm not taking the California baby bar, is, so I want to start with this. The State Bar of California and the National Conference of Bar Examiners, they gave a survey to everyone who took the test afterwards saying that they wanted to study their responses and hear how it went in order for to make their own decisions. So it's pretty clear that both California and the NCBE are using this as a test case. So California had already explicitly said, we're looking at this real closely to see what works, what doesn't, for putting it online in the fall. Now this is the NCBE is also gathering the data from California, presumably to figure out what and how they should administer their October 5th and 6th exam online. So this is why it might be applicable to you even if you're not in California, as we have no idea. Maryland 2 weeks ago was not giving an online test, and now they are. So, I would listen even if you're unsure that you're going to be having to do online. All right. So the way it worked was a few days before the exam, they had everyone go log in and get their picture taken. And then on the day of the test, you logged in at 7:30 a.m. and you log into the website. In this case, they use ExamSoft software. So you logged into the ExamSoft website, and there was a YouTube video about the proctoring. So one thing that's going to be really different is you're not going to have a live person talking to you. So even though the way they've talked about it is that you might have one proctor who's watching several people's webcams, that person is not going to interact with you at all. So it was just you watched a video about what you're supposed to do. You were given a password at 8 o'clock when the exam started. Then you go into the ExamSoft software and you type in the password. And that password is for one question at a time. So your webcam goes on, they take your webcam goes on, they take your picture again, then you get your question. The screen was set up with, in the top left-hand corner, I realize it might be opposite for you as you're looking at me, but top left-hand corner was the question. Then below that was where you type your response. And then on the right side was note-taking spot. The important thing I think about this is on this ExamSoft software, there were about 7 lines that you could see in what you type your response to. So that means that you can't see a whole bunch of your question of what you're typing at one time. They're scrolling up and down if you need to go back and look at what you've already written or anything like that. So
let me stop you right there, because I think this is an important point, and it's going to impact a lot of things. First of all, it means a lot of scrolling, as you said. Secondly, it's going to put a real emphasis on the writing style for essays that we teach. Short paragraphing that's structured and functional is going to be a lifesaver, don't you think, rather than stream of consciousness long paragraphing?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you know how you're setting it up already in the FLA method, and then you're doing these smaller chunks, these smaller paragraphs, I think it's going to be really helpful because you're not going to have to, hopefully it minimizes the amount of scrolling up and down that you have to do. You already know you dealt with it because you dealt with it and then you moved on. You have a strong organizational structure. There's no issue spotting, hopping around. Wait, did I already talk about first degree murder or was that second degree murder, right? Like, you know exactly how you're laying it out, and then you can do it without having to see more of the page in front of you.
Yeah. So if there's still some of you listening, and I know this we'll translate this into our podcast and go to a broader audience. I know some of you are going to be issue spotters and IRAC writers. I'm just going to tell you right now, trying to issue spot an IRAC in this physical structure is going to be really problematic. It's going to be very difficult for people. So I think the Celebration Bar Review students have a distinct advantage here in the writing style, given the format that's being done. And I just want to bookmark one thing that we'll come back to talk about. There are no performance tests given on the baby bar, but everything that we're learning about the way the essay was set up on the screen makes me think performance tests are going to be exponentially more difficult to answer and to do because the size of the screen and the amount of space that's there. So, all right.
Yeah. So on the multiple choice section, the way it worked is you have one question and the answer choices on the screen at a time. You can skip around, so you can flag it and go back later, so it'll help you know what you had flagged. So if you are moving around, you're not going to lose track of it. You can also, in the software, cross out answers that you know are wrong. So it's not really that much different. Basically, everything you would want to do with a pen and paper, you can pretty much do on there. Obviously, you can't write notes next to it, but I don't think most people write notes with their multiple choice questions anyway. So I don't see that as being a problem, but that takes up your whole screen. So that was good. I think the multiple choice went off pretty smoothly. That's not surprising. Multiple choice questions are really easy to give in online formats. One thing, they seem to have loosened some of their rules. So if you guys remember a month or so ago, everything's getting very blurry, but I feel like about a month or a month and a half ago, we talked about the rules that came down, the initial rules that came down from the California bar about how they were going to administer the baby bar. There was a big outrage because they were just very, very draconian. Things like, oh, if your internet blips at all, you're done, you're out, you can't continue on. What they ended up doing in practice was you had 5 minutes to put the password in, to log in, and then you had 5 minutes to start in. So you basically had 10 minutes from when, the time starts. So the time is not, this is important, I guess, the time is not synced to you. So if you put the password in late, they already started. If it started at 8:01, and you don't put the password in until 8:03, then you miss 2 minutes. You don't get extra time. Your time does not start at 8:03. So that's really important. But you do have a bit of a grace period, but beyond that 10 minutes, you would have gotten a 0 for that question. So you do have to log in by a certain amount of time and get started.
And you can't leave the room during that period of time, right?
Right.
Your breaks come after each question, at least the way they did it in this exam.
Right.
And then there must have been a break in the middle of the afternoon for the multiple choice, right?
Yeah. So what they did, I'm not sure with the multiple choice. I'm so sorry. They only had 100 multiple choice questions, and
So 3 hours. Yeah, 3 hours. I don't know if they made everybody sit for 3 hours or not. Okay. Right.
I don't think they did from the person that I talked to, but if you're done early, then you're done.
Yeah.
So you can't leave the room or get up or do anything during that time. But the benefit of it was that they had an hour for each essay, and then your camera goes off, your webcam goes off, and so you have 15 minutes to do whatever you need to do. So the nice thing is there's no I got to run to the bathroom, but if I do that, I lose 3 minutes from my exam time. The exam time the clock is stopped. So it takes longer to do it, but you have a lot more breaks in between that you can do anything you need. So you really should never be in a position where you needed to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water or whatever in the middle of exam time. Yes. So they logged in at 7:30 and finished at about 6 p.m. So yeah, it's a pretty long day. Yeah.
So 2 days like that, theoretically, could be.
Right. Well, shorter because the way that they have it set up, they don't do a performance test. And so, and they have fewer essays, but it's on one day versus if, let's say, California does it and they've got their 5 essays, plus they've got one performance test, plus they have only 100 multiple choice questions, because that's what the online version is, but spread out over 2 days. I would not expect either day to be 7:30 to 6 p.m. because you're adding a little bit more, but you're broadening it over a whole nother day. So,
right. And I want to just clarify, for the October 5th and 6th exam, what we do know right now is only 3 essays, which would be 30-minute essays, so shorter essays than California had offered, and a performance test, which again, I just don't know how they're going to do it. They're going to have to change the structure of the performance test somehow. And then a 100-question multiple choice exam, but given over 2 days. And when they first announced it, I thought, well, that's not very much for 2 days. But now that I'm seeing how long it took them to do 4 essays, no performance test, and 100 multiple choice in a basically 10 and a half, 11-hour day, I see why they had to modify it. I think if a state like California chooses to go to the October 5th and 6th date, they're going to have to make a decision about whether or not they still want to use their California 1-hour essay questions. If so, they're only going to be able to offer at most 3, it seems to me, and that's going to be a challenge. And maybe they drop the performance test out. I just don't know.
Right. And I'm not sure, but I wouldn't put it past. I mean, remember, California, not that long ago, was the land of 3-day bar exams. So I would not make any guarantees that they will drop the number of questions. I just think
that's true. Font of good news today, Megan.
I just think the California examiners are very proud of being very tough and difficult, and we make it really hard, and you've got to prove your mettle. And it might be a longer marathon for California than for others.
Well, mark the moment, folks. You may have heard it here first. The 3-day possibility of a 3-day online test.
Oh no! Oh, I should say I don't think it's going to be 3 days. I just think it might be much longer, 2 days than the October 5th and 6th exam. Maryland, I expect
on the October 7th.
Yeah, I would expect it to be Maryland to have a shorter day than California has. That's what is that Maryland will be done, might be done by 5 o'clock, and California is still chugging along at 5 p.m. Pacific. So.
Yeah. Okay. I think that the structure that's very helpful to get that feedback. And I know that, as you said, the NCBE was getting the feedback too, which I thought was a really interesting tell, that they wanted to get a sense of this. I expect everybody's got to make a decision soon. I mean, we're going to talk about this in a minute for the July exams, but I would think in the next week, there's got to be some announcement about what they're going to do. I just don't know that they can push this out much further. So this is interesting. I think there's a lot of advantages to online testing. I mean, I think you've identified some of them. It's convenient. You're at home. You're safe. I know we've had some people that said, well, I want to handwrite. Well, handwriting isn't going to happen on an online test. So get on your computers, folks. I mean, the day of handwriting exams is quick, disappearing across the country.
Right. They do offer, because of obviously ADA concerns, like they offer handwriting if you have a reason why. And I do know, I mean, I think in most jurisdictions that are doing online, you can apply to handwrite, but they are trying to keep those numbers incredibly low, because it defeats the whole purpose. If they have,
I don't think you're going to be able to handwrite because you say, I don't like to type, or I'm tech phobic, or, it's going to have to be an ADA claim, and you're going to have to show that you handwrote through law school and so on, I think. So there's a lot of things happening around this. I expect that as quiet as this week was, next week is going to be the polar opposite, don't you? I mean, when the dam breaks, it's going to be crazy.
Right. I think, as we are creeping into July, all these jurisdictions that stuck with July have been very quiet.
Yes.
They really just, for the most part, nope, we're fine, we're doing July. But they said that back, most of them in May or April said, we're doing July, we're fine. So now is when the rubber meets the road, and they have to figure out if that's still really safe and feasible. There's a lot of pushback. A lot of states are having students, applicants sign waivers when they go into the exam, saying, I am not going to hold the bar exam liable for, the national conference, or my state bar liable if I get sick. So I just, we're going to see what happens, but it's a good transition into some questions that we got, which is, people saying, I'm really nervous about taking the exam. There's just, with all of the precautions, I don't feel safe with the instructions and I want to make the right decision. Do I just suck it up and sit in July, or should I just move to February of 2020?
Yeah. And so let me start with a couple of things. One is we can't give anyone individualized admissions advice. That's beyond the scope of our services and beyond the scope of our license. Having said that, generally, I guess I would start with some basic principles. The first principle is you should be taking care of your health above all else. There is no reason to sit for a bar exam if you feel like it would jeopardize your health. I think that you have to decide what your comfort level is. Sarah and I were talking about it today. We were talking about, what's our threshold, right? I mean, is it, am I willing to risk going to the movies? Am I willing to risk getting a haircut? Obviously not. Am I, what is it that I'm willing to risk for the health? And the bar exam is obviously a big deal. It's important, but it is in these in-person exams, clearly going into a crowded environment where you've got a lot of people coming from a lot of different places. So I think you got to start with that. The second thing I think you've got to figure out is what's your timing, what's your job circumstance, what's your situation. If you just need to get licensed somewhere, I would look very seriously at taking DC or Maryland online in October. We have no idea how the scoring will be done. We only just now are figuring out what they're going to put on the exam, but it's a test that you can take at home. And it's got value in those jurisdictions only, but it's not a portable score, as you said. And so I know there's some people that are saying, well, I just need a license somewhere. Well, I think DC is certainly that possibility, or Maryland, and there may be others. And then finally, I think I would say virtually every state is saying, if you don't feel like you can take the exam for health reasons, you can postpone without a financial penalty from the bar examiners. And that's true for us as well. And we're not even requiring you to explain to us why. Just tell us you want to take the exam in February 2021 or July 2021. And we are, we will move your registration around. We're not putting any restrictions at all on people moving, switching, deferring. So there's no financial incentive from our standpoint for you to take the exam or not take the exam. So I think that's helpful. Do you want to add anything else to that?
No, I just think we got a lot of questions about, I'm thinking about changing and is it okay? And what happens with, with my bar review course? Like we are perfectly fine with whenever you take the exam, we will be there for you. What we do suggest is that everyone keep studying. So please keep studying, but email June. If you want to change your date, we will change that date. Like that is not a problem. You will have access to your materials. You will have, all the group coaching, everything that you have access to now will remain. There's really no difference. It's just, you've got to make the best decision for yourself, for your health and your mental well-being. There are quite a few questions where, people just a lot of anxiety about feeling unsure of what's the right choice or the wrong choice. So just know that whatever decision you make, we're on your side and we're not going to shame you or judge you either direction. Like it's so personal and you need to do what you feel like is the right thing. So we can't tell you what that right thing is, but you've got to pick for yourself, for your individual circumstance, what that might be. Yeah.
And I know one of the questions we got, there was a student that said, I'm thinking of taking the DC October 5th exam. And then depending on those results, postponing my UBE jurisdiction somewhere else into 2021. I certainly think you could do that. I think as long as you're informing the bar examiners that that's your plan, if they tell you that you can't do it, fine. But I think that they're going to view anything from July 28th through October 6th as being one coherent exam date. And if you fail those exams, whenever they're given, that you should be able to resit or sit again in a new jurisdiction in 2021. I don't think there's a problem that I can see with that. But again, we're not giving anyone individual advice. We're just saying, if that's something that you think makes sense for you, look at taking that DC or Maryland exam. Or I believe we're going to see other states jump onto that date. Consider taking it in another state and then push your first jurisdiction back into 2021, February or July. I think that's a viable option. I also want to talk about this idea of the sort of the dam breaking. We know, as you said, we're getting into July, and the jurisdictions that had planned on July tests have to start saying something. They have not said anything one way or the other, most of them. They're either going to say, yes, we are going for that date, and here's the final details so that people can make their arrangements and travel, or they're going to say, we can't do it, and they're going to jump out of it into something else. Does that seem right to you?
Yeah, and I will say most of the jurisdictions have said, yes, we're definitely doing it, but that when we heard that from them was back in April.
Yeah, and as the COVID numbers change around the country, I mean, we've gone from, a core of states that were having a lot of trouble early on to now a different group of states having trouble. There are going to be some jurisdictions that before were relatively unaffected by this that now are deeply affected. I mean, I think about Texas and Florida, Georgia, California continues to be. But, some of these states are going to have to make very different calculations, I think, about all of this. And so you've just got to stay really vigilant. I mean, we're doing everything we can to stay on top of it, but I want to be explicit that it is up to every individual applicant to watch in their own jurisdiction. The deadlines are what they are. I saw there was a question about laptop registration in a jurisdiction. I can't tell you. If you've missed a deadline, you've missed a deadline. And so you have to be on top of those deadlines in your jurisdiction and be in communication with the bar examiners. And there isn't much else that we can say about that. It's on you as an applicant to be informed of that state's rules, whatever they are, and they are changing rapidly. And so I think you just have to be your own best advocate in that situation. You agree?
Right. We got another question saying, what adjustments should I make due to the fact that now I'm taking an online exam? So this is a Maryland student.
Yeah, it's a great question. You should certainly be typing everything right now. You could take the questions from our materials that are digital PDF, look at them on your screen, and then start typing your answer. You've got your exam software, so you can do a couple of practice questions there to get a feeling for that. We don't know what to tell you about performance tests yet because we just don't know how they're going to do them. And so for right now, I continue to practice them, but if you wanted to get a feeling for it, put the performance test up on your screen and then minimize your screen down to half screen for the PT and a half for writing, and you'll get a feeling for it. I think for multiple choice, there's no real difference. As you said, Megan, it doesn't seem to be anything differently. But the thing I want to emphasize is that with the October exam, as well as, all the exams the NCBE is giving, they are still covering the same topics. They are still testing the same material. No state has said we're going to go outside of that material yet. So even states like Nevada or Indiana or I forget what else now, Tennessee, there's a bunch of states that have said, we're thinking about restructuring the exam, but no state has said they're going outside the outlines. The only exception to that, which has always been an exception, is Louisiana, which tests its own very strange Napoleonic code. So none of you here are concerned with that. But I think that outside of that, there's no real change to make yet. And we don't want you flying around distracted trying to do things. Megan, you sent me an article this week, I think it was in Bloomberg News, about the big box bar reviews and what they're trying to do to prepare students. And it was interesting, wasn't it, in terms of their approach?
Right. Yeah. So, it was reps from Barbary and Kaplan talking about how they're just having to really rework everything, the whole structure of their business model. It's just different. It's premised on they mostly have 3Ls who spend the summer between their graduation and when they start their jobs doing nothing but sitting in a room and studying for the bar exam. And they just couldn't do that this year. So, and then even with all the changes on when the dates happen, there's a lot of people who are starting work, but won't be able to sit for a bar exam until September or October. And so it doesn't allow them to study up until their start date. So, we're really proud that the bar review that we've built for everyone here is already based on the fact that we know and understand that you all have lives and you have other responsibilities and obligations. You have jobs, you have families. And so we know that we can be flexible for you all. And so that's been the nice thing, I think, is that we haven't, for all the curveballs that have been thrown, we really haven't had to adjust anything that we do on our end. It's the same. So it's a little it's a little crazier out there, but I think hopefully you feel that, within our company and our bar review, we're really the same that we would normally be. It's just that you're all suddenly spread out on when you're taking the exam instead of everybody, trying to rush. And
I think your editorial staff's going to lose their mind in the late fall, but yeah.
Four separate exams in the end of 2020 is a lot. That's a lot of model answers. So
Right. And you and I have some mentoring to do between now and then as well. I did see a question about a California student wanting to know about, will they be automatically transferred online if California goes that way? Yeah, absolutely. If that's the only way they give it, everybody will be transferred. You don't have to do anything. Again, I think this is symptomatic of sort of the distraction and the noise that's out there. Just keep your head down, keep focused, stay aware of what's going on, but you don't have to do anything. If your exam switches dates or switches formats, they're going to move you into that or give you an option to opt out.
If you're registered to write the California exam, they might contact you then if they do switch to an online exam to see if you still want to write or if you want to take it online. So, but don't panic. They know you're writing. They know you're registered to write. That's a small group of people. So I would imagine that, and we'll let you know as soon as they say if they're doing an online exam. And so then you'll be empowered also to reach out to them and say, what should I do, if you still want to write it or not.
Yeah.
All right. We had a question about someone who my mind has been all over the place with COVID-19. Just kind of everything's going crazy. And they're trying to pick up again where they left off with studying, saying, I have 78 days until my exam. I have 4 hours per day to dedicate to study now. Please advise what's the best avenue for me to pick back up with my studies.
Well, I would say just to continue on with them, 78 days is plenty of time. So that's somebody that's taking the September 9th exam, I think. And, you can, 4 hours a day is plenty in our course. Again, I think this is the pressure of the big box bar review that says you got to put in 500 or 600 hours. But the nature of our course is built on repetition. So as you get into the course and you just pick up, we're going to automatically be recasting material that you've already seen or heard or studied through the course. So there's no reason to go back. If you're a photo reader, you certainly could go back and photo read everything, all the subjects you've done up to this point in one night, probably. So that's not a big deal there either. So I would say just keep going.
And I saw a question about when the date is for the fall California Baby Bar. They've got it on their website, October 2020.
But they're not giving it. They're not giving the October exam this year.
And that's so crazy because they still have it on their website.
I'm pretty sure there is not a test this October.
That's right.
Because of COVID and because everything pushed back, which is another reason that I'm thinking the October 9th, October 5th and 6th date is still very much in their minds. They already canceled the October Baby Bar. So the next Baby Bar is June 2021. So,
won't be able to grade everyone's California bar exam if they have to grade the Baby Bar. Yes, that's right. So that takes us to the end. Every week is something new in the world of bar review right now, but hopefully this was helpful for everyone and kind of gives you a little bit more clarity.
If something breaks during the week, if California makes a decision or so on, you and I, Megan, will jump on, either do a Facebook Live or record a special podcast for people. We know that the time is going to be of the essence on all this stuff, so we're watching it very, very closely. I know you and I are talking multiple times a day, like, what? What did they do? What's that new thing? So for everybody, continue to just take nice, calm, deep breaths. It's going to work out. It's going to be okay. We've got it under control. You're in the best place you could possibly be, I think, right now. As Megan said, we have not been thrown by anything that's happened yet. In fact, we've been calling the shots before they happen. And so I just want to encourage you to keep studying, do the work you've got to do, and you'll be ready for the exam whenever it's given and however it's given.
Yes, definitely.
Great.
All right. Good luck, everyone.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Megan. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. And we'll be back next week. So everybody have a good, safe weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. That's our episode for this week. As you can see, there is a lot about to happen. As we move into the 30-day window before the July 2020 bar exams, we would expect this next week or two to be very busy with states making final determinations. And so we'll make sure to keep you up to date on that. We also want to remind you that our free training webinar Now is the best time to take the bar exam. Is available on Saturday and Tuesdays. It's free. All you have to do is register right here in the podcast. You can do it that way, or you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/now and find out all the details and get registered, and then we'll see you there. All right, everybody, have a great week, good study week, and we will see you next week along the Extra Mile.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.